This is an exciting day. I've been waiting for this one for quite some time because today we are reviewing and discussing Knives Out, my favorite film released in 2019 and one of my newest favorite films of all time. Fair warning, this plot overview is going to be far more lengthy and detailed than most, but it's incredibly important to the story, so it's just what we have to do today. But if you'd like to skip the plot overview and get right into my spoiler-free thoughts on the film, you can skip to this timestamp in the video. So with that said, let's delve into this mystery and get right into it. The movie begins at the home of Harlan Thrombey, a wealthy crime novelist who is discovered dead in his study by Fran the maid with his throat slit. A week later, after the funeral has passed, the police request Harlan's family and his caretaker, Marta, to come to the mansion for questioning. Officers Elliot and Wagner greet the family upon their arrival and speak privately with each individual, including Linda, Harlan's daughter, Walt, Harlan's son, Joni, widow to Harlan's deceased son, Richard, Linda's husband, Meg, Joni's daughter, and Jacob, Walt's son. Also present for the interrogations is Detective Benoit Blanc, who was hired to aid in the investigation. Several family members have conflicting stories and possible motives for killing Harlan. Like Richard, who was having an affair which Harlan discovered and threatened to reveal to his daughter, Walt, who was fired by Harlan from his publishing company, and Joni, who was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from Harlan to fund her lavish lifestyle by double-dipping on the money meant for her daughter Meg's college tuition that he was paying for. And Harlan promptly cuts off the tuition and her yearly allowance once he realized what she was doing. Everyone tells their own version of reality of the events from the night of the party just before the murder happened. But one of the few consistent points between everyone's story is that Linda and Richard's grown son, Hugh, who goes by his middle name Ransom to everyone except employees at the manor, had left the party early after an argument with Harlan and did not attend the funeral, also being absent for the questioning. The officers give an overview of the timeline following the party, which ended at 11:30, when Marta took Harlan upstairs to give him his medicine and play their nightly game of Go. A short time later, there was a loud noise, which Joni went upstairs to investigate. Harlan explained they had simply knocked over the Go board and sent Joni back to her room. At midnight, Marta left, passing Walt, who was smoking on the front porch. Soon after, Harlan came downstairs for a late-night snack, which Walter discouraged and told him to return to bed, and was the last time Harlan was seen alive. Later, Meg came home after being out with friends, and around 3:30 in the morning, she was awoken by the dogs barking. The officers and Detective Blanc take a break from interrogations and go outside to speak with Marta, whom they were planning to question last. They ask about her work, and she tells them Harlan hired her to be his nurse, eventually giving her more hours as he needed a friend. Blanc says he is aware of a particular condition she has that causes her to vomit if she tells a lie. He tests this by asking if Richard was having an affair, something Marta is fully aware of, but she claims he was not and promptly pukes into a vase. They send her back inside to talk amongst themselves, with the police still believing the manner of death to be suicide, while Blanc is not convinced because of so many lies told by different members of the family. He also reveals he doesn't know who hired him, with only a large envelope containing cash and a newspaper article about Harlan's death arriving at his doorstep. Ready to officially question Marta, Blanc asks her what happened within those 30 minutes from when she went upstairs with Harlan after the party to when she left. It's shown that after their game of Go, during which Harlan talks about cutting the line on all four of them, being Richard, Walter, Joni, and presumably Ransom, and after he playfully tosses the board off the table, Marta goes to give him his nightly medication, but she accidentally mixes up the vials, mistakenly giving him 100 milligrams of morphine, the maximum dosage of which is 3 milligrams. She tells him it takes approximately 10 minutes to die from a morphine overdose that huge, and since she is unable to find the antidote in her medical bag and an ambulance would take too long to arrive, they realize he is going to die. Marta attempts to call for help anyway, but Harlan stops her, even tripping her when she tries to leave the room to inform his family members, resulting in the loud thud heard by Joni. He sends Joni away when she comes upstairs, and then in order to protect Marta, he gives her instructions on what to do in order to avoid suspicion and prevent her undocumented mother from being discovered and her family being broken apart. Following his directions, Marta leaves the house at midnight and goes past Walter and his son on the porch, specifically commenting on how late it is to draw attention to the time. She drives down the driveway needing to pull off near a statue, but can't remember whether Harlan instructed her to do so before or after the statue to avoid the security cameras. So she pulls off before and sneaks through the back gate, able to get through quietly because the dogs know her so they don't bark. She climbs a trellis on the side of the house through a hidden window and dons Harlan's hat and robe, going downstairs to be seen by Walter through the glazed window and is sent back upstairs, making him believe it's actually his father. Since Walter had supposedly seen Harlan after he watched Marta leave, this would rule her out as a suspect. She climbs back down the trellis but is seen by Juanetta, Harlan's mother, who mistakes her for Ransom, asking if he's returned again. Marta goes back to her car and drives home. During the interview, Marta only gives partial truths due to her inability to lie. She tells the police and Blanc that she played Go with Harlan, gave him his nightly medicine, and left at midnight. Blanc thanks her and is determined to find the true cause of death, suspecting foul play. That night at Harlan's memorial, Marta is chatting with Fran, who gets hysterical talking about a crime show drama involving poisoning and how she doesn't think Harlan killed himself. But Marta suddenly gets woozy, so Fran offers to share weed from her stash hidden inside a clock on the fireplace mantle. Marta goes outside for some fresh air and finds Blanc still there. He tells Marta he doesn't believe she killed Harlan since she was the only one with nothing to gain from his murder, and he insists she accompany him the next day as he investigates around the entire property. Marta goes home to her mother, and we see, unbeknownst to her, there is a single drop of blood on her shoe from when she tried to go back inside the study and get Harlan to call for help. But he slit his throat with a knife as she stood in the doorway. The next day, as everyone anxiously waits for the will reading, Blanc and the officers, accompanied by Marta, search the property for clues, many of which Marta is able to cover up before they are discovered, as they would point to her. She learns she turned off the road too early and was seen by the security camera, which she manages to scramble the tape by using a magnet. There are also her footprints in the mud going through the back gate, but she pretends to absent-mindedly trample over the prints. However, Blanc does find a broken piece of the trellis and dried mud leading down the hallway from the window Marta climbed through. Ransom arrives for the will reading, causing the dogs to bark, and the rest of the family isn't very happy to see him, making snide comments about skipping the funeral but being early for the will reading. The argument between Ransom and Harlan on the night of the party is brought up, which was partially overheard by Jacob while he was in the bathroom. Hearing Harlan mention his will and Ransom angrily saying, "I'm warning you," which forces Ransom to admit the argument resulted from Harlan informing him he was being cut out of the will. At the reading, it is stated that the will was indeed altered a week before Harlan's death and includes a message saying these changes are for the best. The family is shocked to find that Harlan left the entire inheritance, his $60 million fortune, the house, and his publishing company, all to Marta. Although the family was kind to her before, they all turn on her and Ransom helps her escape. They go to a local restaurant and Ransom says he understands why Harlan cut him off, and after leaving the party he had a moment of clarity that he would now have to fend for himself, and it felt good. After Marta hungrily devours a bowl of baked beans and sausage, he uses his knowledge of her inability to lie to coax her into telling him everything. After learning the truth, the first thing Ransom oddly says is that he thought he was the only one who could beat Harlan at Go, but he was told Marta wins more. He says that must mean something and agrees to help her in exchange for his cut of the inheritance. Meanwhile, the rest of the family is still back at the house, desperately trying to find any possible way to contest the will. They learn of the Slayer rule, which would make someone ineligible for any inheritance if they are found to have caused the death, even in civil court. However, it doesn't apply if the death is ruled a suicide. They then turn to Detective Blanc, who confirms the investigation is still ongoing and he still suspects foul play. The family wants Marta to renounce the inheritance, so they pressure Meg into calling her under the guise of comfort, but attempts to convince Marta to give the inheritance back to them. The next morning, reporters surround Marta's house as news has gotten out that Harlan is leaving his entire fortune to his caretaker and nothing to his own family. Walt comes by to blackmail Marta about her mother's undocumented status, revealed to them by Meg, and how it's bound to be known with so much media attention. But it essentially backfires and Marta closes the door in his face. She then finds an unmarked envelope that was delivered to her containing a partial photocopy of Harlan's toxicology report and the words, "I know what you did," written on it. She goes to Ransom about the blackmail, and they drive over to the medical examiner's office only to find it up in flames with everything destroyed and surrounded by police. Ransom asks Marta if she's received any other communication from the blackmailer. So she checks her email and finds a message with an address of an abandoned laundromat and a time of 10 a.m. Blanc spots them and begins to approach, but Marta quickly drives away, leading to a car chase that's really quite one-sided with her slow old Hyundai. Eventually, they are caught, with Ransom immediately being arrested. Blanc tells Marta that Grandma Winetta falsely identified him to the police from when Marta climbed down from the trellis. So Blanc assumes Ransom forced her to drive away. He gets in her car and instructs her to drive to the station, but on the way, she makes an excuse to stop near the abandoned laundromat and meet with the blackmailer alone. Inside, she finds her medical bag and an unconscious Fran, who appears to be drugged. She wakes up barely able to speak, but says she stashed a copy of the toxicology report and tells Marta, "You did this," before passing out again. Even knowing it could lead to her arrest, Marta attempts to save her by performing CPR and calling 911. At the hospital, Detective Blanc receives a call from the police with the news that Ransom has confessed about what Marta did. So on the drive back to the mansion, Marta, relieved about not having to hide the truth anymore, finally tells him the full story. Back at the house, Meg apologizes to Marta for telling the rest of the family about her mother and comments that she'll have to raid Fran's weed stash once this is all over. Marta then realizes Fran hid the tox report and her stash inside the clock, so she takes it and hands it over to Blanc before preparing to tell the family about how Harlan really died and renounce the inheritance. But as she's about to confess, Blanc suddenly stops her after reading the tox report and tells off the family for treating her so poorly. He brings Marta into the library, having solved the entire mystery. Up until now, he still hadn't figured out who hired him and why, because Harlan's death was believed to be a suicide. Someone would have had to know ahead of time not only that a crime was committed, but also the contents of the will before it was officially read to the family, devising a plan to force Marta to renounce the inheritance. So Detective Blanc has the police bring in the culprits, and it is Ransom. He acts surprised when he is accused of hiring the detective, but Blanc explains Harlan must have told him not just that he was getting cut out of the will, but that he was giving everything to Marta to twist the knife in further. Ransom mentioned before to Marta at the restaurant that Harlan told him she wins more at Go, and there's no other logical explanation for Marta to be brought up in an argument about the will. Blanc goes on to surmise Ransom's clarity about having to fend for himself became a plot to murder Harlan and pin it on Marta so the Slayer Law takes effect and she has to forfeit the inheritance, even if the death was accidental. Continuing his theory, Blanc says Ransom snuck into the house the same way Marta did while the party was still ongoing and switched the medicine in the vials and stole the antidote, and was seen by Winetta, hence why when she saw Marta and mistook her for Ransom, she asked if Ransom was back again. Blanc then removes the two identical medicine vials from his pocket with the labels taped over and sets them on the table, asking Marta to hand him the morphine, which she is able to correctly identify even without seeing the label based on the slightest difference in viscosity and tension in the medications, because she is a good nurse. So when Marta thought she had mixed up the vials, she actually instinctively gave Harlan the correct medicine as shown on the toxicology report, meaning Harlan wasn't actually poisoned and he'd still be alive if he had let Marta call an ambulance, making his death well and truly a suicide. But it's not over yet, because Ransom had to cover his tracks and switch the medicine back into the proper containers. He attempted to sneak back into the house later on after the party, but the dogs were outside and began barking, so he had to leave. And the next day, when the news broke out not of a drug overdose, but of a suicide, he anonymously hired Blanc, still believing Marta would be blamed for the death. He returned to the house during the funeral when he assumed the house was empty to switch the medicine back, but unbeknownst to him, he was seen by Fran. She wasn't sure exactly what he was up to, but knew it couldn't be good. So she obtained a copy of the toxicology report and photocopied the header and sent the blackmail letter to Ransom, which he then forwarded to Marta once she confessed the mix-up of the medicine because he realized no crime was actually committed. So she would be able to keep the inheritance, and he insisted on helping her so he could still get a cut of the fortune. But before that, he also burned down the medical examiner's office and met Fran at an earlier time at the abandoned laundromat, drugged her with the morphine, and took the full copy of the tox report. He emailed Marta with the address, expecting her to now be blamed for Fran's death, but since Marta is a kind person, she helped to save Fran rather than letting her die. Marta then realizes Fran wasn't telling her, "You did this." She was saying, "Hugh did this," since Ransom always had the help call him by his first name because he's an asshole. Marta then gets a call from the hospital and she informs the others that Fran is alive and she's ready to talk to the police. Confronted by the inevitable testimony against him, Ransom angrily confesses, but says they have no evidence, and the most he could be charged with is attempted murder and vandalism, which he claims with his expensive lawyers he could easily get out of. However, Marta suddenly pukes all over him, meaning she lied and Fran did die, and Ransom just confessed to her murder, which the police happened to record. Enraged at being tricked into admitting to murder, he grabs a knife off of a large display wheel of other knives and lunges for Marta, attempting to stab her. But the knife turns out to be just a prop with a retracting blade, and he is promptly arrested. As he is being taken away, Linda finds a note from Harlan that Richard found earlier but discarded upon finding it to be seemingly blank. But Linda knows her father better than that and heats the note from underneath with a lighter, revealing a message written in invisible ink, and she learns of Richard's affair. Blanc also tells Marta that he knew the entire time she was involved from the blood spot on her shoe. With Ransom being loaded into the police car, Marta looks on from the balcony of her mansion at the family in the driveway. I believe I can say without an ounce of exaggeration that Knives Out is the best movie of 2019, which is reflected by the ranking on my video of top 5 best, worst, and blandest films of the year. It's without a doubt, hands down, my favorite movie of the year and one of my new favorites of all time. I didn't see the trailer for Knives Out and, to be honest, had no intention of even seeing it at the theater. But I had a few hours to kill one day between a couple other movies I was viewing. I think it was Uncut Gems and Frozen 2, and ended up choosing this one since it seemed to be getting good reviews. And oh, was I so fortunate that I did. There are a handful of films I've seen twice in theaters, but this one was so fantastic. I saw it not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times during its theatrical run. That's something I've never done before. This film is that good and is absolutely worth it. Knives Out is witty, it's hilarious, it's ingenious, it's suspenseful, and I love every minute of it. All the actors give the performance of their careers. There is not a single person who was weaker than the others. It seems like it would be difficult to make a suspenseful comedy, of course wanting the jokes to land and the audience to laugh at proper times, but also not wanting to break that tension and keep the audience hooked and desperate to know what will happen next. But Rian Johnson manages to pull it off flawlessly to keep the audience on edge of their seat and second-guessing themselves just when they think they've got everything figured out. There wasn't a single thing I didn't love about this movie. Not many films can be rewatched again and again with the same amount of enjoyment each time, but Knives Out is an exception that I will remember for a long time. Part of what makes this film so great is the attention to detail, which is just absolutely superb. They even went as far as to create a lighting rig that reflects a window in a character's glasses rather than the camera and crew. This film was also shot digitally, but there are still light bleeds and gate weaves, which is those little jitters you see either in the text or the film itself to give it a more old-school whodunit vibe. The also consistent inconsistencies from everyone about Marta's origin, despite all claiming she's like family. And they all say they wanted her at the funeral, but they were outvoted. and many other little tidbits that I didn't even pick up on until my second or third or fourth viewing. It's more of a subtle way to show early on that they pretend to care, but they're clearly shitty people and don't take notice of the help. I've heard some complaints that it's too hard of a line between who we're supposed to root for and who is meant to be the bad guy, which personally I find kind of dumb to compare to movies like Marriage Story or Parasite, where each person or groups of people are both exceptionally flawed and do shitty things, so we as the audience are unsure which side to take. These are exceptional films and it's a great direction to go, but having a solid idea of we like this person and want them to succeed, but we don't like these people, they're assholes, it's not a bad thing. If anything, it allows us to get more invested in the protagonist here in Knives Out rather than constantly questioning them or flip-flopping back and forth. We grow more attached and concerned for them as the story plays out. So because of this, I'm giving Knives Out my personal score of the very first ever 10 out of 10 given to any film in a Movie Monday video, both in years past and recently. It truly is that spectacular. There are very few times I would not only willingly but enthusiastically accept the idea of a sequel, but when a sequel for Knives Out following another case of Detective Benoit Blanc was confirmed, I nearly jumped for joy, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any suggestions for movies you'd like me to discuss and review in the future. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye!